From Ridgeway Finance. Our police, to palalankas using a carcass. Mr. Kincaid, he said. I just wanted to make sure you're aware of the outstanding balances associated with your son's automotive holdings. Outstanding balances. The phrase made my stomach tighten. What balances? I asked, though part of me already knew. Het told me. 5 3 loans past due, to nearing repossession. Nearly $3 million in combined exposure. I remember staring at my office window as he spoke, the city below glowing like a grid of molten gold. I didn't interrupt. I didn't even breathe. When he finished, asked if he'd like permit. I told him I'd handle it. Then I hung up and poured a drink. That night, I confronted my son. He was in the garage, polishing the hood of his Aston Martin like it was a living thing. You didn't think I'd find out? I asked, my voice even to calm. He looked up, caught, but not guilty, never guilty. Dad, it's fine, he said. I've got it under control. Ridgeway just messed up some dates. You're 3 months behind, I said. On 5 cars, he shrugged. I'm restructuring. It's how the system works. He talked about leverage again, about asset-backed credit, about refinancing. He sounded like me worse. He sounded like a younger, dumber version of me who thought risk was a strategy, not a threat. I told him to sell to cars. He laughed. You don't sell art, Dad. You collect it. That's when I realized he didn't love the cars. He loved what they said about him. He loved that they whispered power when he drove through Sunset Boulevard, that people turned their heads and wondered who he was. The Dati Debdintin always beat that him was right. Because 3 months later, when Ridgeway Finance started proceedings to reclaim the vehicles, I didn't let them. I flew to Chicago, walked into the marble lobby, and asked to speak to the board. They thought I was bluffing when I said I wanted to buy them out. Ridgeway was a regional bank, small, predatory, profitable. The kind of bank that made money off people who didn't understand how fast it could drown them. The kind of bank I used to respect. The acquisitions quoi. I didn't tell me son. And the deal finalized. I had his entire loan portfolio transferred into a shell account under my control. His debt was mine now, literally. The next morning, I called him. Your loans, I said. They're settled. He was ecstatic. See, Dad. I told you I'd get it fixed. You didn't, I said. I did. For a moment, silence filled the line. You paid them off? He asked. No, I said. Ebo. Them. He laughed at first, the kind of nervous laugh that hides fear. Then he stopped. What do you mean you bought them? Own the bank, I said. Which means I own your debt. Every payment, every clause, every default. You answer to me now. He didn't speak for a long time. When he finally did, his voice was small. That's not love, Dad. That's control. Maybe it was. But as I stood there, watching the sunset glint off the polished chrome of his collection, I couldn't tell the difference anymore. He didn't come home. For 3 days after that call. The garage stayed silent, no engines revving, no bass thundering through the walls like it used to. The staff told me he'd been seen at some hotel downtown, drinking too much and talking too loudly about family betrayal. I didn't chase him. I wanted to, every instinct in me screamed to, but I knew that. Chasing him then would only prove his point. Control. That's what he'd... Ses premiers one told me he was right. But what he never understood was that control was the only thing that kept our family alive. When you build an empire out of thin air credit lines, paper contracts, bluff and bravado, control is oxygen. Without it, everything collapses. On the 4th night, I found him back in the garage. He was sitting in the driver's seat of his McLaren, the one he'd named Ghost. The engine wasn't running, but the dashboard glowed in the dark like a sleeping beast. His head was bowed, his fingers resting on the steering wheel, tracing the leather, stitching. I didn't speak. I just stood there, watching him. You know, he said finally, his voice low, when I was a kid, you used to tell me you'd give me the world. I did, I said quietly. No, he murmured. You gave me yours. He turned to look at me then, eyes rimmed red, not from tears but exhaustion, the kind that comes from realizing your whole life is borrowed. You didn't buy the bank for me, Dad, he said. You bought it because you couldn't stand the idea that I owed someone else. I wanted to deny it. But I couldn't. He was right. Every time I'd looked at those loan documents, it wasn't the numbers that bothered me, it was the signatures. Someone else's name above his. Someone else's control over what he loved. It made my skin crawl. My son was supposed to be free of that world, not chained by it. I was protecting you, I said finally. From what? He shot back. From growing up. From losing everything. He laughed bitterly. You mean for Frambiu, that harder et tourned away, prone on the dash. The McLaren's lights flared briefly, illuminating the rows of cars behind us Ferrari, Aston, Bugatti all gleaming, all lifeless. Monuments to our shared delusion. This SS softly. You taught me that money was proof. That power meant safety. That if I just built enough, owned enough, nothing could hurt me. That's not what I meant to teach you, I said. But it's what I learned. He stepped out of the car and faced me. For the first time, I noticed how much he looked like me at that age, the same jawline, the same controlled fire in the eyes. Only his was still young enough to burn. I don't want to owe you, Dad, he said. Not for this. Not for anything. You think you can just walk away from it? I have to. He walked past me, his footsteps echoing off the polished floor. I stood there, une habit to mauve, slided across the crookback. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation, hearing his voice in my head. You didn't buy the bank for me. You bought it because you couldn't stand the idea that I owed someone else. You were right, but there was evento myself. When you spend your life building, you start to believe that ownership is love. You start to think that the people you protect owe you gratitude, but love isn't a balance sheet. I knew that once, a long time ago, before the money became louder than everything else. In the morning, I called my lawyer, Daniel. I need you to draft something, I said. What kind of something? He asked, wary. He'd been with me long enough to know my somethings were rarely small. I want to transfer Ridgeway back. Sell it at a loss if I have to. He paused. May I ask why? Because owning it doesn't feel like winning anymore. He hesitated. Your son? Myself. It took 2 weeks to unwind the deal, but Ridgeway was gone by the end of the month. I didn't tell my son. Première wanted. To see if he'd notice, not because I wanted credit, but because I needed to know if he was paying attention to something other than his reflection. He didn't call. Not for days. Not for weeks. Then one evening, I came home to find an empty space in the garage. The McLaren was gone. A note sat on the workbench, folded neatly beside a key fob. Dad, I sold the car. Used the money to clear the last of the loans. The rest I'll don't be back. Hey, for the first time in years, I smiled. Not the kind of smile comes from victory, but quiet, painful feeling. Montbar said, I can't right. I didn't replace the missing car. Some nights, I'd walk through, touching the cold metal of what was left, and remember what it estimate me to give him everything and what it cost me to take it back. Then, one morning, I woke to a text from an unknown number. Need your advice, not money, just advice. It was him. We met at a small cafe in Venice Beach. He looked different, Lena, wearing clothes that didn't scream status. Etardmewa. Consulting now, helping restore classic cars for private collectors. Their stories on wheels, he said, eyes bright. Every one of them has a past. As he spoke, I realized something had shifted. He wasn't chasing horsepower anymore. He was chasing meaning. Do you still hate me for the bank? I asked. He smiled faintly. No, I get it now. You were scared. I was. He nodded. I guess I was too. They. Conversation Dritzinik. Tena dead. You know, I raised an eyebrow. Which one? The Shelby. The one you gave me. I couldn't help but laugh. The only one worth keeping. He grinned. That's what I thought. Outside, the sky was burning orange, the ocean whispering beyond the glass. For the first time, I didn't feel like the owner of anything. Juste a fate fine without like. And as we walked to the parking lot, side by side, I realized the truth I'd spent my whole life avoiding. Sometimes, the only way to keep what you love is to let it drive away. 3 years passed before I saw that Shelby again. Not in my driveway, not under the fluorescent lights of the garage, but glinting under the California sun at a classic car rally in Monterey. I hadn't planned on going. It was my lawyer, Daniel, who insisted. You need to get out of your head, he'd said. You've been hiding behind balance sheets again. He wasn't wrong. Since selling Ridgeway, I tried to simplify my life. But old habits die like God slow, loud, and clawing at the edges of your peace. So they're ours. Surrounded alla chins and much cologne. When premier sawi deep navy pilver stripes. The faint imperfection in the left fender I remembered from the restoration. My breath caught. The Shelby GT500. My gift. My curse. My son's beginning. And my undoing. I moved closer, half expecting it to vanish like a ghost. And then I saw him leaning against the driver's door. Sunglasses perched on his head, talking to a couple in their 50s who were hanging on his every word. He looked older now. Not in the tired way I used to look after board meetings, but in the grounded way of someone who's finally learned the weight of time. When is Salmer history and soft Ned? Dad, he said, stepping forward, extending a hand instead of a hug. I took it. His grip was firm, steady. He wasn't my boy anymore. He was a man who'd learned to live without my shadow. I didn't think I'd see her here, I said, nodding toward the Shelby. She's a star now, he said, smiling. Restored her myself. I raised an eyebrow. You? Yeah? Every bolt, every piece of leather. Took me a year. I walked around the car, running my fingers along the polished surface. It wasn't perfect, there were tiny scratches, signs of use. But that's what made it beautiful. It wasn't frozen in time anymore. It was alive again. You did good, I said. He shrugged, trying to hide his pride. She's not the fastest, but she's honest. Doesn't pretend to be more than she is. He glanced at me, then added, kind of like what I'm aiming for. I laughed quietly. That's new. Yeah, he said. So is this. He handed me a small, embossed business card. Arden Motors, restoration, integrity, heritage. You're running your own shop. I asked. He nodded, small, but growing, word of mouth mostly. People trust stories more than specs. Stories, I repeated, tasting the word. You learned that from the cars? He looked at me for a long moment. From you, actually, just. The part you didn't mean to teach. That stung, but it was fair. I deserved it. Estil. I felt something shift inside me, a quiet pride that wasn't laced with ownership. You've made something real, I said. He smiled, trying to, what about you? Still buying the world, one institution at a time. I shook my head. No, I've been selling, actually, downsizing, getting out. He raised an eyebrow. You? Out? Turns out Kunasis estudiema curling upward. So, you're finally human. Ha! We both laughed, and for the first time in years, it wasn't strained. It was just. Easy. As the crowd began to drift toward the main exhibition, he asked, you want to drive her? I blinked. You serious? She's yours too, you know. No, I said. Not anymore. He tossed me the keys anyway. Maybe not on paper. But she started with you. That counts for something. I hesitated, then slid into the driver's seat. The smell hit me first, old leather, gasoline, sun. My hands found the wheel, like they never left it. The key turned, and the engine roared to life, a low, throaty growl that vibrated through my chest. I felt 20 years younger. He leaned on the door, grinning, careful, old man. She bites if you disrespect her. Good, I said. So did I. We took her out on the Pacific Coast Highway. Windows down, wind tearing through the silence that had grown between us all those years. The sound of the Shelby's engine was music-raw, defiant, forgiving. Halfway through the drive, he said, you know, I used to think you loved your money more than me. I did, I admitted. At least, I thought I had too. I thought if I lost control of one thing, I'd lose everything. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, I get that now. But you don't have to protect me anymore. I know, I said. I just have to be your father. The road stretched ahead, endless and golden, the ocean beside us flashing like broken glass. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to be in control. I just wanted to be present. When we stopped at a lookout point, he climbed out. Before I did, you okay? He asked one afternoon as I dropped a socket for the third time. Just age catching up, I said, forcing a smile. He didn't believe me. You should see someone. I've seen enough people, I muttered. Doctors don't fix what time breaks. He frowned but let it go, for a while. Weeks later, he brought it up again. Dad, it's getting worse. You can't even thread a bolt anymore. Then I'll teach you, said. Tring to joke, that he said sharply. Don't pretend this isn't happening. The truth was I was scared, not of dying, but of stopping. of losing the rhythm, the small rituals that had kept me sane. I'd spent my whole life terrified of losing control, and now my own body was teaching me the final lesson in letting go. The diagnosis came quietly, without drama. Parkinson's, early stage, but certain. I sat in the doctor's office, hands folded in my lap, listening to him list symptoms, treatments, stages, all the vocabulary of decline. But all I could think about was how still the air felt, how final the words sounded when he said them out loud. When I told my son, he didn't say anything for a long time. Just sat there, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. Finally, he asked, "What do you want to do?" "What I've always done," I said. "Keep building." He nodded slowly. "Then it will build together. However long you can." From that day forward, he became my hands when mine failed. When my grip trembled, he steadied the wrench. When I dropped a screw, he picked it up without a word. And when I grew too tired, he'd finish the job in silence, the sound of tools against metal, filling the space between us. We never spoke much about it. We didn't have to. The work became our language. And somewhere between the engines and the long nights, something unexpected happened. He started teaching me. One evening, as we rebuilt the transmission of a '63 Corvette, he said, "You know what I love about restoring these old cars? Every piece that breaks makes the whole thing more meaningful once it's fixed." I smiled. "That's a poetic way to justify labor costs." He laughed. "I'm serious. You think of them as systems, machines that serve you, but they're more like people. They fail, they rust, they stall, but they still want to run. They just need someone to believe they can." I looked at him, realizing he wasn't talking about the Corvette. Months passed. My condition slowed me, but it didn't stop me. We started smaller projects, steering columns, mirror mounts, glove boxes, things I could manage. But every now and then, I'd catch him watching me, a shadow in his expression he tried to hide. One night after Chloe Small wore notre book. "What's this?" I asked. "Your notes," he said. "From over the years. Measurements, paint codes, little sketches, I've been saving them." I flipped through the pages. My handwriting sprawled and messy, smudged with grease. "Why?" He shrugged. "Because I want to make sure your touch doesn't disappear. One day, when I can't remember how you did things, I'll have this." I felt the weight of it, not just the paper, but the meaning, my legacy, condensed into oil-stained pages. "Keep it safe," I said. "I already have," he replied softly. As the years turned, the shop evolved. We hired 2 apprentices, kids who reminded me of my son when he first began. Curious, fearless, still believing that engines had souls. I watched him teach them the way he once taught me, patient and precise. And every time he corrected their grip or explained a process, I saw glimpses of myself, not the man I was, but the one I'd become. One afternoon, as I sat outside the shop, sunlight pooling on the hood of the Challenger, he joined me. "She's still running strong," he said, patting the hood. "So are you," I said. He smiled. Only because I had a good mechanic, we sat there quietly for a long time, the sound of waves faint in the distance. "Finally," he said, "when you're gone, I'll keep her running. The car, the shop, all of it. I know," I said. "But don't keep them for me. Keep them to look at my fading light. Everything I do now is for the stories." And as the sun set over the coast, painting the sky in gold and rust, I realized that everything, the empire, the debt, the bank, the car's inheritance of wealth, but of wisdom, I'd spent a lifetime building monuments to my name, but my son had built something better, meaning. And when my hands could no longer hold a wrench, he held them instead. The world doesn't remember men like me for long. But maybe, somewhere in a quiet garage in Long Beach, when an engine purrs. Back to life after years of silence, a father's touch will still echo in the hum of the machine. And that will be enough. Summer arrived heavy that year, thick with salt air. The scent of rain on concrete and the low hum of engines that never stopped breathing. I was slower by then. Trevor Tremhands, on some day, even lift wrench, felt loading ghost. My body, once built for power, had become something fragile. But my son was radiant. Arden had turned the shop into something of a pilgrimage site. Collectors from across the country called, but he only took the ones that mattered, cars with history, not just value. I'd sit in the corner, most days, my stool pulled up near the bay window, watching the rhythm of his movements. It was like music, his gestures smooth, deliberate, confident, the same confidence I once mistook for control. Ollie's dinti kamiki staring once. What? He asked, smiling. You work like a man who's already made peace with himself, I said. He smirked. That's because I did. Tell me your secret. Failure, he said simply. And forgiveness, that was his way. Simple words that landed like sermons. We kept working, side by side, through the summer. He'd give me small tasks cleaning, spark plugs, cataloging old manuals. I knew what he was doing, letting me stay useful, dignified. I loved him for it. One morning, I came in and found a cupboard shape in the center of the shop. Premier coup de tel. By the lines under the tarp that it wasn't just any car, it was something purposeful. He saw me and grinned like a boy again. Don't peek yet, he said. You'll ruin the surprise. What surprise? I asked. You'll see. Sit down. I've got something to show you. He handed me an envelope. My name was written on it in his handwriting sharp, neat, decisive. Inside was a stack of papers. I scanned the first page. My chest tightened. Transfer share as I turned pages. You're giving me the shop. He shook his head. Not giving. Sharing. You own half. Arden. He raised a hand. Don't argue. It's not charity. It's thanks. I tried to speak, but my throat wouldn't let me. He smiled softly. You built a bank to own the world. Dad, I built this place to honor the people in it. You're part of that. I stared at him, searching for words that didn't exist. Finally, I managed. You've done what I never could. What's that? Build something worth inheriting. He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. Maybe, but you taught me the hard parts. The patience, the grit. The way to keep going when everything's falling apart. I shook my head slowly. No, son. You learned those on your own. I just gave you the mistakes to avoid. We both laughed, the kind of quiet laughter that holds a lifetime of understanding. Later that day, when the shop was empty and the last light of dusk slanted through the windows, he finally pulled the tarp away. The car beneath was black as ink, with chrome edges that caught the fading sun like mirrors. It was the Shelby, our Shelby. The first one. But it wasn't, as it used to be. He'd rebuilt it again, modern engine, hand-stitched seats, my initials engraved, subtly, on the dash beside his own. The nameplate on the back read, Premier Justin, breath caught somewhere, and his beef. You rebuilt her. He nodded. She was due. She's the reason all this exists. I wanted her to look how she should have always looked, balanced, timeless. I ran my trembling hand along the fender. She's beautiful. She's yours, he said. One last ride. We drove that night. The coast road was almost empty, the world bathed in moonlight. The Shelby hummed beneath us smooth, alive, eternal. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The silence between. US wasn't distance anymore. It was peace. At one point, I glanced over. He had one hand on the wheel, the other resting loosely on the shifter, his eyes focused on the horizon. I saw myself in that expression, not the ruthless man I was, but the dreamer I'd once been before I started mistaking fear for ambition. We stopped near a cliff that overlooked the Pacific. The waves below caught the moonlight, turning the water into moving glass. He killed the engine, and for a moment, the world felt suspended, just the two of us and the soft tick of cooling metal. Dad, he said quietly, do you ever think about the cars we didn't save? All the time. You think they still matter? I smiled faintly. Everything that ever ran matters, even if it broke down. Especially if it broke down. He nodded, staring out at the horizon. I think people are the same way. The wind was cool, and I felt something loosen inside me, something that had been clenched for decades. I wanted to tell him everything I never had. How proud I was, how sorry I was, how much I loved him. But the words got caught behind the years of pride that still lived in my throat. He must have sensed it, because... He looked at me and said softly, I know, that night became the last time I drove a car. My hands couldn't handle it much longer after that. The tremors became too sharp, the muscles too unsteady. I didn't fight it. I'd made peace. I'd built, destroyed, rebuilt again. I'd been a banker, a father, a fool, and finally, a man who understood the weight of grace. Months later, I watched from My chair in the shop, as my son, gave the Shelby to a new owner, a museum collector from San Francisco, who'd promised to display it under its true name. The Kincaid before he'd left unlaced me down with it. He asked. She's yours now, I said. And so is everything she taught us. He hesitated, then nodded. You know, I think she always belonged to both of us. He was right. She did. And as the tow truck pulled away, the last rays of sunset flashing off the Shelby's hood, I realized something I'd chased all my life but never found until that very moment. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's who carries you forward. And mine was standing right there, hands in his pockets, grease on his arms, heart wide open. My son. It's the only thing I ever built that truly lasted. Winter returned, and with it came the quiet kind of stillness that settles on a man who knows his time is running short. My body had slowed to a crawl, tremors now a constant rhythm, movements deliberate, each gesture a negotiation with gravity. But my mind still roared like a 12-cylinder engine, alive with memory. I had moved into the small apartment above the shop. My son insisted. You'll be closer to us, he said. Closer to the noise. He didn't understand that noise was my heartbeat. The clatter of tools, the groan of lifts, the deep hum of engines coming back to life. It wasn't noise to me. Et toi, Preyer? Every morning, I'd sit by the window, overlooking the shop floor. Arden would already be below, coffee in one hand, clipboard in the other, greeting his team like a conductor walking through an orchestra before a performance. He carried himself with the ease of someone who had nothing to prove anymore, only something to protect. One afternoon, I called him up to the apartment. He came quickly, concern flickering in his eyes. You okay? I nodded, motioning toward the chair across from me. Seated down. Son, there's something I need you to see, from beneath the table. I pulled out a black leather binder, old, worn, its edges frayed. I laid it between us. He frowned. What is it? My last ledger, I said. He raised an eyebrow. From the company. I nodded. From everything, my entire career. Every loan, every merger, every buyout, every mistake. He hesitated, then opened it. And see me? Handwriting filled the pages, precise, sharp, clinical, numbers, signatures, profits, losses, and next to each, small handwritten notes. What's this column? He asked, pointing to one labeled cost real. I smiled faintly. That's not the dollar amount. That's what it actually cost me. Relationships, sleep, time with you and your mother. He flipped further. The notes grew darker. Ignored her birthday. Didn't visit Dad before he passed. Missed Arden's graduation. Signed away my piece. By the last page, his hands were trembling. He looked up at me, eyes wet. Why are you showing me this? Because I want you to know what not to keep. Dad, listen, I said, my voice firmer than I expected. When I was your age, I thought power was the only way to be safe. I thought money could fix anything, control could replace love. I was wrong. And I don't want you to ever measure your life in ledgers. He closed the book slowly. You already taught me that, he whispered. I smiled. Good, then promise me something, anything. When you start a family of your own, don't let them inherit your absence. He nodded, and in that small motion, I felt something release inside me like an old, not finally, loosening after decades of strain. The next few months blurred together. My strength faded, my steps grew slower, but the shop remained alive. I could hear it every day, the rhythm of engines, the laughter of the team, the music Arden played softly from an old radio. One evening, I woke to the smell of oil and coffee drifting up from below. I shuffled down the stairs, slower than usual, and found Arden working alone. The garage door was open, moonlight spilling in. He was sitting in the driver's seat of the Challenger, staring out at the night. She still runs? I asked. He looked up, smiling softly. Always. I nodded. So do I, he laughed. Barely still running, I said. He patted the seat beside him. Come on, one last drive. I can't, you can, he said gently. I'll shift. You steer. I hesitated, then climbed in, every movement deliberate. He started the engine. The rumble filled the night, low and steady, like a heartbeat made of thunder. He pulled us onto the road. was quiet streetlights glowing like amber ghosts. The ocean shimmered in the distance, the air cool against my face. We drove in silence, the kind of silence that means everything's already been said. Then he reached over, his hand covering mine on the wheel, steadying it. "You know," he said quietly, "when I was younger, I thought you were trying to own me. But now I think you were just scared-eyed." "Drift too far. I said. "And I did the same thing. My father did to me, tried to protect you by control instead of trust." He glanced at me, smiling faintly. "You did better. Not soon enough for this," he said. The road ahead curved toward the cliffs. The moon hung low, swollen and gold, casting light across the hood. The Challenger purred beneath us, steady, alive. For a moment, it felt like we'd never aged, that we were back at the beginning again. Then I felt my chest tighten. Not sudden, not violent, just a deep, undeniable heaviness, like gravity remembering me. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't want to ruin the moment, but he noticed. "Dad," I smiled weakly. "Keep driving. Dad, keep driving, son." He did. Slow, steady, silent. The wind whistled through the open windows, carrying the scent of salt and memory. When we finally pulled over by the overlook, I could barely lift my hands. "Et you're not dumme penninger. Hey, Steve, okay?" I managed a faint smile. "I'm right here." He grabbed my hand, gripping it hard. "You're not allowed to do this now." "Not here." I whispered. "It's okay. Dad, please leave. You fixed me." "Arden," I murmured, "you rebuilt what I broke." That's all any father could ask. His tears fell freely now. I could barely see him through mine. The world had gone soft around the edges, like light through glass. "Tell me one thing," I whispered. "Anything. Did I do enough?" He squeezed my hand, voice breaking. "You did more than enough." Smooth and steady, like it was waiting for permission to rest. Tell me he kept the Challenger after that. Never did. Just kept her covered in the back of the shop, starting her once a week so she'd never forget how to breathe. And sometimes, late at night, he'd hand on the wheel, listening to the hum of the engine like it was a voice he could still hear. He didn't know it, but I was there too. In every sound, every vibration, every echo of the road we'd traveled together, because love doesn't vanish when the engine stops. It idles quietly, waiting for the next hand to turn the key. Years passed, and the world changed around Arden, motors, but inside those brick walls, time moved to the rhythm of memory. The old shop survived when others closed, not because it was modern or efficient, but because it was human. Customers came, not just to fix their cars, but to remember people who'd lost someone, people rebuilding something inside themselves. They came for what the sign promised, heritage restored. And every time the Challenger's engine turned over in the back corner, they'd glance toward the sound and whisper, "That's the one, the Kincaid car." They didn't know the story. No fully. But they felt it. You could feel love like that, told, scarred, unfinished, but still alive. Arden grew older. The lines around his eyes deepened, his hair thinned, but his hands never lost their surety. Every meeting a panel, tuning eyed was conversation with his father, with the man who taught him how to build, destroy, and build again. He'd talk to him. Sometimes when no one was around. "What do you think, Dad? Timing's a little off." "Huh?" And somewhere between the hum of the engine and the smell of oil, he could swear he heard an answer. He married, had a daughter small, fierce, with grease always under her nails. She'd follow him around the shop, asking endless questions. "Why do old cars sound so different?" she'd ask. Arden would smile. "Because they've got stories. Kiddo, you can't fake that sound." When she turned 10, he took her to the back corner and lifted the top. The Challenger still gleamed, its black paint deep as the ocean at night. "This," he told her, "is your grandfather's car. Can I drive it someday?" she asked, eyes wide. "One day," he said. "When you understand what it means." "What does it mean?" He smiled softly. It means we remember where we came from. And we never let fear be the reason we stopped moving. That night, after locking up, Arden sat alone in the office with a box on his desk, the black leather binder his father had given him, and beside it, his own. One old, one new. He opened them both and began writing. His columns weren't numbers and losses. They were stories, names, lessons, lines like, what you build isn't what lasts. Who you build it with, that's the legacy. He closed the book, switched off the light, and stood by the window. The moon was high, silver spilling across the hoods of sleeping machines. The world was quieter than he remembered. Maybe it was him who'd changed. As he turned to go, he paused, glancing once more at the covered Challenger. For a long time, he just stood there, hand resting on the fender beneath the tarp. "Thanks, Dad," he whispered. And for the briefest moment, he could almost feel a hand on his shoulder, steady, certain, proud. When he left that night, the wind came in through the half-open door, brushing across the car, lifting the corner of the top just enough for moonlight to touch the chrome. The old engine ticked once, quietly, like an exhale. And then, in the soft darkness of the shop that bore their name, everything still not in silence, but in peace. Because the story wasn't about the car, or the bank, or the empire. It was about a father who learned that love cannot be owned, and a son who proved that some things, once rebuilt, never truly break again. The engine of legacy hummed. On, unseen but unending, quietly waiting, faithfully alive, for the next hand to turn the key. Whisper, that's the one. The Kincaid car. They didn't know the story, not fully. But they felt it. You could feel love like that old, scarred, unfinished, but still alive. Arden grew older. The lines around his eyes deepened, his hair thinned, but his hands never lost their surety. Every emotional, tuning-eyed was a conversation with his father, with the man who taught him how to build, destroy, and build again. He'd talk to him, sometimes when no one was around. "What do you think? Dad, timing's a little off. Huh?" And somewhere between the hum of the engine and the smell of oil, he could swear he heard an answer. He married, had a daughter small, fierce, with grease always under her nails. She'd follow him around the shop, asking endless questions. Why do old cars sound so different? She'd ask. Arden would smile. Because they've got stories, kiddo. You can't fake that sound. When she turned 10, he took her to the back corner and lifted the top. The Challenger still gleamed, its black paint deep as the ocean at night. "This," he told her, "is your grandfather's car. Can I drive it someday?" She asked, eyes wide. "One day," he said. "When you understand what it means." "What does it mean?" He smiled softly. It means we remember where we came from. And we never let fear be the reason we stop moving. That night, after locking up, Arden sat alone in the office with a box. On his desk, the black leather binder his father had given him, and beside it, his own, one old, one new. He opened them both and began writing. His columns weren't numbers and losses. They were stories, names, lessons, lines like, what you build isn't what lasts, who you build it with, that's the legacy. He closed the book, switched off the light, and stood by the window. The moon was high, silver spilling across the hoods of sleeping machines. The world was quieter than he remembered. Maybe it was him who'd changed. As he turned to go, he paused, glancing once more at the covered Challenger. For a long time, he just stood there, hand resting on the fender beneath the tarp. "Thanks, Dad," he whispered. And for the briefest moment, he could almost feel a hand on his shoulder, steady, certain, proud. When he left that night, the wind came in through the half-open door, brushing across the car, lifting the corner of the top just enough for moonlight to touch the chrome. The old engine ticked once, quietly, like an exhale. And then, in the soft darkness of the shop that bore their name, everything still not in silence, but in peace. Because the story wasn't about the car, or the bank, or the empire. It was about a father who learned that love cannot be owned, and a son who proved that some things, once rebuilt, never truly break again. The engine of legacy hummed on, unseen but you and dingy, quietly waiting, faithfully alive, for the next hand to turn the key. Whisper, that's the one. The Kincaid car. They didn't know the story. Not fully, but they felt it. You could feel love like that old, scarred, unfinished, but still alive. Arden grew older. The lines around his eyes deepened, his hair thinned, but his hands never lost their surety. Every motion a panel, tuning-eyed was a conversation with the man who taught him how to build, destroy, and build again. He talked to him, sometimes when no one was around. What do you think? Dad, timing's a little off. Huh? And somewhere between the hum of the engine and the smell of oil, he could swear he heard an answer. He married, had a daughter small, fierce, with grease always under her nails. She'd follow him around the shop, asking endless questions. Why do old cars sound so different? Cherche they ask. Arden would smile. Because they've got stories. Kiddo. You can't fake that sound. When she turned 10, he took her to the back corner and lifted the top. The Challenger still gleamed, its black paint deep as the ocean at night. This, he told her, is your grandfather's car. Can I drive it someday? She asked, eyes wide. One day, he said. When you understand what it means. What does it mean? He smiled softly. It means we remember where we came from. And we never let fear be the reason we stopped moving. That night, after locking up, Arden sat alone in the office with a box on his desk, the black leather binder his father had given him. Unbesitzen, one old lump of again writing. His columns weren't numbers and losses. They were stories, names, lessons. Lines like, what you build isn't what lasts. Who you build it with, that's the legacy. He closed the book, switched off the light, and stood by the window. The moon was high, silver spilling across the hoods of sleeping machines. The world was quieter than he remembered. Maybe it was him who'd changed. As he turned to go, he paused, glancing once more at the covered Challenger. For a long time, he just stood there, hand resting on the fender beneath the tarp. Thanks, Dad, he whispered. And for the briefest moment, he could almost feel a hand on his shoulder, steady, certain, proud. When he left that night, the wind came in through the half-open door, brushing across the car, lifting the corner of the tarp just enough for moonlight to touch the chrome. The old engine ticked. Once, quietly, like an exhale. And then, in the soft darkness of the shop that bore their name, everything still not in silence, but in peace. Because the story wasn't about the car, or the bank, or the empire. It was about a father who learned that love cannot be owned, and a son who proved that some things, once rebuilt, never truly break again. A engine of legacy hummed on, unseen but unending, quietly waiting, faithfully alive, for the next hand to turn the key. I never meant for her life to implode. I only wanted her to feel what I felt every time she stepped over me to climb another rung toward the flashing lights. But when I saw her face splashed across every gossip site, mascara streaked and mouth twisted mid-denial, I realized I hadn't just exposed her, secret I detonated it. They called her the fallen angel of Los Angeles, and for the first Timinier people with skying worship, and the cruelest part, she still had no idea that the anonymous source who leaked her affair to Celebrity Pulse Weekly was me. 3 years earlier, when I first met Cassandra Vale, she was everything I wasn't, dazzling, effortless, magnetic. The kind of woman who could order coffee and somehow make the barista stammer. I was the invisible, one beside her, the one holding her purse while she took selfies with strangers. We'd met at a screenwriting workshop in West Hollywood, back when we both swore we wanted to tell stories that mattered. She wrote about fame. I wrote about loss. It didn't take long to realize whose stories people wanted to hear. I just think people are fascinated by ambition, she told me once, chewing the straw of her iced latte, eyes fixed on her reflection in the cafe window. The hunger for recognition, it's primal. Everyone wants to be remembered, or adored, I said. She grinned. Same thing. I used to think she was joking, that the cynicism was armor. But the deeper I fell into her orbit, the more I saw how much of her was made from hunger and mirrors. She could charm anyone, producers, influencers, even the guy at the parking garage who kept her spot reserved after hours. Cassandra didn't just want fame. She believed she deserved it. Like it was written in her DNA. Our friendship started with late-night brainstorming sessions, cheap wine, and whispered dreams we'd sit on the floor of her studio apartment, surrounded by open notebooks and half-eaten takeout, planning short films we'd never make. She'd lean close, her perfume dizzying, and tell me, when one of us makes it, we both make it. Promise. I promised. God help me. I meant it. Then came Luna's Fall, the indie film that changed everything. It was supposed to be our collaboration, my script, her performance, but somewhere between draft 6 and final cut. I was reduced to a consultant, and she became the breakout star. I told myself it didn't matter. I was proud. I smiled through the interviews, clapped at the premiere, and even lent her my jacket when the wind picked up on the red carpet. But inside, something dark was shifting. After the film's success, Cassandra's world became a blur of champagne, neon parties, and hashtags. She signed with a major agency, moved into a Hollywood Hills mansion, and started dating Ryan Hales, the married lead singer of Glass Temple, a man whose tabloid reputation was already gasoline waiting for a spark. I tried to talk too.